Debate is underway on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. The Senate voted to advance it last night. That's after President Biden and a bipartisan group of senators agreed on major parts of the package. Republicans around the country are pushing back against a new wave of virus mandates and lockdowns. The conflict set off a war of words between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. And new details emerge about a ransomware attack tied to a Russia-based criminal syndicate. It affected roughly 24 Texas communities 2 years ago. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Debate is underway on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. The Senate voted Wednesday night to start work on it.
The Senate has just come together and in a strong bipartisan fashion.
Biden welcomed the news.
Looks like you reached a bipartisan agreement on infrastructure. Fancy word for bridges, roads.
17 Republican senators joined Democrats in voting to launch the debate. The lead Republican negotiator says it's an important first step, even though there are challenges ahead.
Every American believes that roads and bridges, ports and waterways, even our digital infrastructure needs to be updated. They know it because they travel on those roads, go to those bridges.
It has a hefty price tag of $550 billion in new spending. Under the bill, funds will go to roads and bridges, modernizing the electric grid and expanding renewable energy, passenger and freight rail, and high-speed internet, among many other things.
We're touching every element of infrastructure. If you're on the rails, if you're in a car, if you're basically wanting to get on internet, your bridges and your roads, everything, airports, we've touched everything here.
As for how to pay for it, the goal is to repurpose unspent virus relief and unemployment aid, selling broadcast spectrum, reinstating cleanup fees for chemical companies, and reversing a Trump-era pharmaceutical rebate, among other sources. Democrats face a timeline to act.
My goal remains to pass both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and a budget resolution during this work period. Both. It might take some long nights. It might eat into our weekends, but we are going to get the job done, and we are on track.
The final deal could run into troubles if it isn't fully paid for when the Congressional Budget Office looks at the details. But it is unclear if the 57-page bill will get enough senators backing it to pass. This comes as Democrats are also working on the broader $3.5 trillion package. It's being considered under budget rules that only need a simple majority. That means Democrats can push it through without any Republican support. It would be paid for by increasing taxes on corporations and Americans who earn more than $400,000 a year. Now, speaking of massive funds, the extra $300 a week in federal unemployment benefits is set to expire soon. Half the states already ended the benefits early, while the rest will expire in September. And 16 months after those measures were created, lawmakers aren't focused on extending them. Back in March 2020, lawmakers rushed to create those financial and housing protections to cushion the financial blow brought on by the pandemic. Now some of those safety nets are going away. The federal eviction ban issued by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is set to expire at the end of July, meaning millions could lose the roof over their heads. The nonprofit National Low-Income Housing Coalition is calling for an extension, even though the deadline has been extended 3 times. But the CDC and White House have said it will not be extended again. Also expiring at the end of this month, the federal ban on foreclosures, which protects homeowners with government-backed loans. Despite all this, $46 billion in federal rent relief money approved by Congress in its last 2 rescue packages will continue to be distributed through states, cities, and local entities. And some states have extended their own eviction protections, including New York and California. And the U.S. Department of Treasury has a searchable list of resources for those needing rent assistance. Now, speaking of rent or living places, survivors of the Florida building collapse are getting the help they need to have a place to live. A charity is making sure they can have a year's worth of rent paid. Florida-based charity Global Empowerment Mission and its partners announced they will pay the first and last month's rent and security deposits at new apartments for survivors. They have raised over $370,000. Global Empowerment Mission had already secured free temporary housing and donated goods for the survivors. The charity and its partners believe they will soon have the funds to pay the survivors rent for a year. Global Empowerment Mission's founder says the group's goal is to help fill the gap between the short-term help that arrives immediately after a disaster and the long-term solutions through insurance and legal settlements that can take a year or more to develop. For some survivors, the press conference was the first time they had seen each other since right after the collapse. While Florida condo collapse survivors look for places to live, Google offices will stay empty a bit longer. CEO Sundar Pichai released a statement Wednesday saying its target return date is now October 18th. Google employees will be staying in sweaters, leaving their business clothes for a bit longer, as working from home has been extended. The social media giant will also require on-campus workers to get vaccinated. Pichai says the vaccination requirement will go into effect in the U.S. within the next few weeks. Requirements for other locations will begin within the next few months. Now, as to the vaccine and mask mandates being rolled out, Republicans around the country are pushing back. A war of words between Democratic and Republican lawmakers Wednesday. That's after the Capitol's attending physician, Brian Monahan, issued a mask mandate for the House of Representatives Tuesday, including for people who have already been vaccinated. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy a moron after he tweeted criticism of the new rule. McCarthy returned fire.
This is no different than her telling people they couldn't go out, but she's getting her hair done. Just today, I watched her in a private meeting not wearing a mask. So, do as you say, but not as she does.
Pelosi accused Republicans of going against science on vaccines and mask wearing.
Science is the answer, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's a health crisis, whether it's our preeminence in the world in technology, science, 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 science.
The CDC issued new guidance Tuesday saying Americans should wear masks indoors in areas where there are high rates of virus transmission. McCarthy says the new mask rules for the House don't match CDC guidance, and they aren't about science.
We are vaccinated. We're not a hot spot, but they're forcing you to wear a mask. Not in the Senate, but in the House. This is just about more control. This is just the beginning of a set, because school's going to start coming back. They're going to shut school down again. This is about control. Republican
governors are also pushing back against mandates from the federal government. Speaking to the American Legislative Exchange Council, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says governments shouldn't take away the freedom of Americans to make decisions for themselves.
And I think it's very important that we say unequivocally no to lockdowns, no to school closures, no to restrictions, and no mandates.
DeSantis and bureaucrats are trying to decide how Americans should live.
Consigned to live in a Faucian dystopia in which we're governed by the whims of bureaucratic authorities who care little for our freedom, little for our aspirations, and little for our happiness. No more.
Pelosi says there shouldn't be a discussion about the new rules, and members of Congress should just follow the guidance of the Capitol physician. The CDC says the studies supporting their new mask guideline aren't available yet. Now, with the push for vaccinations, Pfizer just announced its vaccine sales are beating estimates by a lot. The drug maker projects vaccine sales will hit $33.5 billion this year. That's nearly 30% higher than previous estimates. Those numbers would push Pfizer into the lead as the best-selling drug of all time. So why is it doing so well? One part is Pfizer is charging more for its shot. The U.S. just ordered another 200 million doses of Pfizer, each dose costing $24. For the previous orders, the cost for a shot was at $19.50. That brings the total number of doses the U.S. has purchased to a whopping 1 billion. Now, speaking of massive amounts of money, let's turn to the slew of ransomware attacks that have been causing havoc in America lately. A top FBI official on Tuesday told lawmakers that Congress should not make it illegal to pay ransom to cybercriminals.
If we ban ransom payments, now you're putting U.S. companies in a position to face yet another extortion, which is being blackmailed for paying the ransom and not sharing that with authorities. And so it's a really complicated conversation, but it's our position that banning ransom payments is not the road to go down.
The advice came during a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on ransomware. This comes in the wake of several high-profile ransomware attacks that impacted various industries as well as critical U.S. infrastructure. One of the most disruptive recent attacks was the one earlier this year that shut down the Colonial Pipeline, America's largest fuel pipeline. The closure led to panic buying, which resulted in gas shortages. In that case and several others, the impacted companies decided to pay the ransom in order to get their data back and their operations up and running. And new details emerge about a ransomware attack tied to a Russia-based criminal syndicate. It affected roughly 24 Texas communities 2 years ago. Staff in small cities and towns struggled for days, with disruptions to core government services, brought on by a sophisticated cyber attack. Jason Whistler first learned their computer system was hacked during his morning cup of coffee on August 16, 2019.
It was a scary feeling, and there's always that urgency. You know, we have to check on the city and the network and, you know, the whole totality. But of course, we always have these concerns about, you know, like Garrett said, all these documents that we've just been working on.
The city of less than 13,000 people rushed to shut down its computers after realizing workers were frozen out of files. Over the next several days, residents couldn't pay water bills. The government couldn't process payroll, and police officers couldn't retrieve certain records.
As humans, we generally naturally think about ourselves first. And so, you know, it wasn't, oh my God, they're not going to be able to pay the water bills. Oh my God, I've lost all my work.
Some computer screens flash gibberish ransom demands. The same message even spat out of printers inside the office. Governor Greg Abbott declared it a cyber disaster and deployed Texas National Guard cyber specialists. They aim to help hacked cities assess the damage, restore data from backed up files, and retake control of locked systems. In total, some 23 government entities had been hit. The culprits were affiliated with REvil, a Russia-based gang that last spring extorted $11 million from meat processor JBS. More recently, the group carried out what's believed to be the largest global ransomware attack on record.
The entities who had backups, they were in a better position than others. And then it's a matter of visiting with and assessing those entities for them to make the business decision of what was it that was impacted, how long would it take to rebuild, what were the costs of that?
Communities in Texas were ultimately able to recover most of their data and rebuild their systems without paying a ransom. But Crawford is encouraging all organizations to take a more proactive approach to cybersecurity. And Biden is warning cyber attacks could lead to war.
If we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach.
His comments came on a visit to U.S. intelligence agencies Tuesday. Biden says ransomware attacks are causing more damage in the real world now, and the threat is growing. And he says Russia is a serious cybersecurity threat to the U.S., partly because they have a weak economy.
When I was with Mr. Putin, who has a real problem, he's sitting on top of an economy that has nuclear weapons and oil wells and nothing else.
He says that makes Putin very dangerous. Biden says China is another major threat. He called them a possible mortal competitor to the U.S. in the future.
He is deadly earnest about becoming the most powerful military force in the world, as well as the largest and most prominent economy in the world.
Biden says China has a real plan and the U.S. needs to keep pace. He says the U.S. needs to balance cooperating with Russia and China on some issues while the U.S. intelligence community keeps a watchful eye on their ultimate objectives. And now, as to ways to protect oneself from cyber attacks, the National Security Agency is offering a simple but effective approach to prevent hackers from breaking into your mobile device. That is, step 1, turn off your phone, and step 2, turn it back on. You can stop hacking by simply rebooting your phone every week. So said the National Security Agency's Best Practices Guide for Mobile Device Security. According to an expert from NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate, the simple action makes even the most sophisticated hackers work harder to maintain access.
A lot of modern cyber attacks are a chain of 2, 3, or even more vulnerabilities in a row that have to be successfully exploited. And if you can reset the adversary back to the beginning of that chain and force them to go through the whole thing again, that's also an aspect of incurring cost on them.
Always in arm's reach and rarely turned off, cell phones have become top targets for hackers. They're able to steal personal data, secretly turn on cameras and microphones, and even track the user's locations.
Your phone knows where it is on the earth, and it will, under many circumstances, share that information with external parties.
Usually, once the hacker gains access to the system, they'll look for a way to stay in by installing malicious software into the device's root file system. But that's getting more difficult as phone manufacturers like Apple and Google added strong security features to block malware from core operating systems.
Just be careful which apps you install. Right? Install the ones you need. When you're done with one, you're not going to use it anymore. Uninstall it, because by doing that, you keep your attack surface more bounded.
The NSA's guide also acknowledges that rebooting only works some of the time and offers an even simpler solution: don't carry the phone with you. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.